You heard the president say tonight that Osama bin Laden and his gang are to terrorism as the mafia is to crime, and that his protectors, the Taliban leaders of Afghanistan, have brutalized the Afghan people. He specifically said women not allowed to attend school. You can be jailed for owning a television. Well, you've probably heard a lot about the Taliban in recent days, but I want to bring you now a kind of reporter's notebook of my own, because in 1996, just after the Taliban took power and the civil war was still going on, I went to Afghanistan to see for myself just who these mysterious extremists really were.
The Bible says, sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. After 10 years of merciless struggle, the Soviet Union left Afghanistan in 1989. Soon, the Taliban would be the only ones left standing. Their first act was the public execution and hanging of the former president and his brother.
The Taliban, I think, are the leftovers of any very long-running war. The society is totally destroyed. The country is devastated. You get a generation of young people who know nothing but violence, nothing but war, and essentially these are the Taliban.
Back when I was there, they were roaming bands of young men in from the provinces, swarming the streets, mostly illiterate, all of them armed.
It's a Kalashnikov.
Yeah, what's your result?
AK-47.
All Afghans are basically trained to fight. They pick up a gun as a child would pick up a toy. They are sharpshooters by the time they're 6 or 7 years old.
We now know more about their implacable fundamentalism. Women made to cover themselves at all times or risk stoning. 5 years ago, these few brave women agreed to come into the room with us and remove their veils.
We've heard that some of the women have been beaten.
Yes, that's right.
I also sat with the Deputy Foreign Minister Mohammad Stanisky, who said that all the terrorist camps in Afghanistan were being shut down by the Taliban.
In our foreign policy, we have already declared that we are totally against terrorism in the world.
You've closed the camps here?
Anyone who is trying or who would like to use this country as a center for taking or carrying sabotage activities against others, we will never allow them. We are against them.
But in fact, from the terrorist camps, the Taliban found a patron, Osama bin Laden, who reportedly gave their impoverished government $3 million, and that was just for a start. By another account, he married his daughter to the mysterious Taliban leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar. He is rarely seen. He's only entered the capital, Kabul, a few times in the last 7 years, and suffering out in the countryside as they have long done. The 24 million Afghan people. 1 in 4 children die before they're 5. Cholera, typhoid run rampant. Stephanie Bunker works for the UN in Afghanistan.
The city of Kabul looks like the war zone that it was, meaning that it looks utterly bombed out. There's no telephones. The roads are unbelievably bad. Most Afghans don't know what electricity is. Almost no one has access to safe water. There was a point in this year where people in northern Afghanistan were willing to work for 38 cents a day.
The average lifespan is just 45 years old. And even before this crisis, millions were on the brink of famine.
They collect wild grasses to eat as famine foods that are neurotoxins, which can cause paralysis or can kill you. They are eating bread made out of wheat flour and ground dried locusts. It's something more than just an underdeveloped country.
The Taliban have become very unpopular over the last 2 years, I think. You know, even within their own ethnic group, people wanted simple economics and simple livelihood, jobs.
So if there is one clear villain, there may be many losers if the U.S. rains bombs on Afghanistan. I'll never forget what one of those brave women whispered to me through her veil. God go with you, she said, and tell the world our veils conceal our tears.
And Charlie, if history is any experience, it's worth pointing out again that the Taliban will fight to the death.
Well, if it is to be war, and if part or all of it is to be fought in Afghanistan, there are all kinds of questions being asked. What would be our objectives? How would we achieve them? And how do you fight in such forbidding territory where there may not be many hard targets to hit? So to look at such questions, we want to start with Robert Oakley, former U.S. ambassador to Pakistan and a counterterrorism expert.
But the Russians had a bad experience in Afghanistan. They were there for 10 years. It was their Vietnam.
Indeed it was. The lesson of history is you don't conquer Afghanistan. Access is too hard, the terrain too forbidding. Afghanistan is totally landlocked, surrounded by nations not always friendly to the United States. To move in, U.S. forces would either have to base in or cross over Iran to the west, Islamic republics to the north, or Pakistan to the south and east. But that's just the start of the problems. Once there, as the Soviets found when they tried to conquer the country, the ground itself is just as hostile as the Afghanis.
The terrain in Afghanistan is mountainous. Secondly, there are no roads. And thirdly, the inhabitants have nothing to lose but their lives.
Retired Soviet General Sergei Goncharov knows whereof he speaks. He was the deputy commander of the Alpha Force. That is the Russian equivalent of U.S. Special Forces. And he has given thought to the question, how do you get Osama bin Laden?
They will not capture him by rocket assaults and carpet bombing alone.
So if you can't get him from the air, you have to go in.
To this day, no one has been able to conquer Afghanistan. Neither the English nor the Russians, and I don't believe the Americans will be able to.
I don't think we want to go in and occupy Afghanistan or any other area. I think we want to go in, do our business, and get out.
General Wayne Downing ran the U.S. Special Operations Command until 1996. The lessons cited by the Russians, he says, have been learned.
I would not advocate that we get involved in a ground war, in an occupation of Afghanistan like the Soviets did.
Military sources say we could see some kind of high-profile missile attack to launch the effort. But then, chances are, Americans won't even know about subsequent skirmishes. They will likely be carried out by the U.S. Special Operations Forces, secretly inserted in small teams. Sources tell ABC News they are already posted in that region of the world.
A lot of options that we had considered in the past to not only get Osama bin Laden, but also his lieutenants, were rejected. They were rejected because they were judged to be too risky. They were rejected because of collateral damage. This is not the case today.
The U.S. Special Operations teams could hide in rugged terrain for days, use the tactics of guerrillas themselves, but with far greater force. Their intent to capture or kill bin Laden or suspected members of his inner circle. They could also mark targets for future precision bombing raids, using weapons like lasers to guide bombs in from high overhead.
It might be a small office building. It could be an apartment. It could be a small village.
Another critical target probably won't take any bombs or troops at all. The terrorist lifeline, their money.
How they get money to the right places at the right time, how they get the right kind of equipment, how they raise their funds.
But in all of this, a caution that has to underlie military thinking and the thinking of civilian commanders. In whatever the United States undertakes, could it touch off a new wave of response, not just from terrorist networks, but from fundamentalist Muslims so far on the sidelines? Again, former ambassador to Pakistan, Robert Oakley.
As we've seen in the attack on the trade towers, they don't mind dying themselves. If they think it'll enhance the cause, they welcome death.